Hello friends, my name is Michelle, and today we're going to be making homemade bread. I've had various people ask me for my bread recipe, and honestly I think that making bread is such a process and kind of an art. I could give you a list of ingredients, and I will do that, but I really want to show you the process of how to make bread, because if you just throw all the ingredients together and expect bread to come out, it won't. So I'm going to show you how to make bread today. It's kind of a lengthy process from start to finish. I would say it takes me about 4 hours. A lot of things can change when you're making bread, such as if it's hot outside, the bread will rise faster. If it's cold, it will rise slower. If it's humid, you'll need extra flour. If it's dry, you won't need so much, and you might not want to use as much water. So there are just a lot of different things that can change about this recipe, but I can show you in general how it works. One disclaimer is that a lot of people make bread a little differently than I do. I make it the way my mom taught me, and with all love, respect, and humility, I think this bread is a lot better than a lot of people's. So anyway, let's get started. The rule of thumb is it takes about 1.5 cups of water per loaf of bread. So that can kind of give you an idea of how much water to use in wanting to get started. And honestly, usually water is the only thing I measure. I tried to kind of write down what the measurements are for other things so that you guys can work on a recipe. But anyway, so if we're going to make a batch of about 5 loaves, that would be 7.5 cups of water. If you're using a pan that's, kind of this size, honestly, I got this pan from Dollar Tree. If they're a little bit bigger pans, you might want to use a little bit more water if you're still wanting to come out with 5 loaves. Sometimes this recipe, if I have that 1.5 cups of water per loaf, sometimes it doesn't make as much as I hoped, so you got to be willing to kind of learn through it. Anyhow, let's get started, and we are going to put 8 cups of water in this bowl. I am aiming to make about 5 loaves of bread. I have 4 pans that are this size, and then I have one pan that's a little bit bigger, so that's the reason I've brought it up to 8 cups instead of 7.5 for 5 loaves of bread. So, let's take us over to the sink. And you will excuse the fact I have not washed dishes today yet. We want the water to be warm, not so hot that it burns you, but we want it to be warm because that makes it a good environment for the yeast to grow. And I'm just getting the water out of the tap. It takes a little while to heat up. One of my favorite things to use when I'm making bread is a wooden spoon. I have never used a metal spoon making bread. I've used plastic, but never metal. It has to be very strong and stiff. Most metal spoons are a little bit too flexible for really being able to use in making bread. That's what I found. So I'm kind of adjusting the water here so that it's the right temperature. It's about maybe how you would enjoy taking a nice hot shower, about that temperature. There's 1. 2. 3. 4. 7, 8. All right, we got our 8 cups of water, and we are, oopsies, coming back over to the table. I don't have much counter space in this kitchen, so sorry about that. So I do a lot of work on my table. Next thing we want to add is some sugar. You can use really any kind of sugar, brown sugar, white sugar. I've even, in a pinch, used apple juice when I didn't have sugar. But for a recipe this size, I'm using about 1/3 of a cup. And I didn't mention this is going to be whole wheat bread, or at least mostly whole wheat. I tend to use a little bit of white flour near the end, but it's by and large whole wheat. Next, I'm going to use some yeast, and I have the instant safe yeast. That's what I use for this kind of bread. I get large quantities of it and store it in my freezer. So we're going to put 3 tablespoons in the bowl. I have made the mistake before of not putting enough yeast, and the bread was a flop. So we don't want to do that. Oh, that jar doesn't want to close. There we go. And I'll show you what it looks like. This is what it looks like, the sugar and the water and the yeast together. And I like to let it sit for just a moment. You can see it starting to bubble already. You want to start that reaction between the sugar and the yeast. And it's not a huge deal to wait a long time, but I do like to wait for just a moment and kind of let it start to react. You can see there it's making some nice bubbles. That means that we have some good yeast on hand and that it likes the sugar and it's feeding on it. Okay, and one other thing that I like to put in bread, it's not an absolute must, but I do like to use it, is flaxseed. And it just helps to make the bread taste good and makes it extra healthy. So I'm going to put about 1/2 cup in. I like to go shopping at Aldi's, and so I got the flaxseed from Aldi. So there's about 1/2 cup. It makes the bread have a nice flavor. And flaxseed is so good for you. Has omega-3s in it. A lot of times people drink it down in juice or water. I have done that many times, but I prefer to just eat it in food. All right. Okay, so now our yeast is bubbling nicely and it's time to add some flour. I took a little break to try to set up a way that I could show you the actual bread instead of me. So I have set the phone on a little box and put a jug of apple juice in front of it, trying to make it stay and point downward so that you can see into the bowl. So I'm going to do that now. Hope you can see that. So you can see it's foaming nicely. And if it wasn't foaming quite that much, it's okay. It's just that I took some time to get the camera set up right. I am going to put in the flour now. I use white wheat flour. It is 100% whole wheat. It is a hard wheat, and it makes bread turn out so nicely. I will show you here my bag of flour. I get flour by the 50-pound bag, and because we go through so much bread here. I have used red wheat, and it does make good bread, but you must use white flour when you use that, because if you use 100% whole wheat, it is way too heavy. The white wheat, you can make 100% whole wheat. So I'm going to add, and it's a little bit hard to tell you exactly how much it will be. I will count it out as I go, but again, like I said, it kind of depends on whether it's humid outside or dry or that kind of thing. So here's 1, 2, and my guess is going to be somewhere in the vicinity of 8 cups or more. So we'll start stirring it, and that was 2. I can see it's bubbling very nicely. That yeast is happy. It has all that sugar to feed on. Here's 3. And I like to stir it kind of between each cup or 2, just to make sure that I don't get too much flour in there, to make sure it's just the right consistency. That was 3. I'll put in 2 more. 4, 5, 'If you put too much flour in the bread, it will make it crumbly. So that's why we don't want to put too much flour in, so that it'll have a nice crumb, a nice consistency, and it won't fall apart when we cut it. That was 5. It's getting thicker. Here's 6. Well, it's getting about the thickness that we want. This is about like the thickness of a cake batter, I guess. Cake batter doesn't have the gluten so activated, of course. But you can think of it about like a cake batter. I think I'll put in 1 more, make it 7. And you really want to start stirring it pretty vigorously. That helps the gluten to be activated. When my mom makes homemade bread, she'll often use egg beaters for a little bit, maybe 5 to 7 minutes, and that really gets the gluten activated. I haven't done that very much for a while. I tend to just beat it with a spoon. But this is a thing that, from at least how I've talked with other people, most people don't beat their bread dough. When we say beat it, we don't mean hitting it. We mean really stirring it vigorously. If you make bread in a Bosch, the Bosch will beat it. But when most people make bread by hand, I have not found that a lot of them tend to beat it. So this was about 7 cups of flour. And I just knocked over my sugar. Okay, sorry. You can see how it's really getting beaten up. It's a workout too. And you really just want to stir it and 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 stir it. The thing is, I have made the mistake of not beating it enough, and that can also cause the bread to be crumbly if the gluten is not activated enough. My arms get tired. But you can see how the dough is kind of starting to be a little bit stringy or kind of stick together a little bit. That tells us that the gluten is being activated. You see how it sticks together when I lift it up like that? Kind of strings up a little bit. So I do this for 3 to 5 minutes. I don't know how long I've been going. Feels like a long time. Use the sponge method when I make bread. So that means that after I'm finished beating it here, I'm going to let it sit for about 30 to 45 minutes probably and let it rise. That also helps to activate the gluten. So it makes the bread have a nice crumb. So the bread actually ends up rising exactly. So we have beat this bread pretty mercilessly, and we will let it rise. I let my bread rise 3 times. Once after I've beaten it, once after I've kneaded it, and once again right after I put it into loaves before it goes in the oven. So this will rise for about 30 to 45 minutes. I want to make a note that this bread dough is fairly thin. I think that a lot of other people who make bread tend to use thicker dough, and that's not necessarily a problem, but I've noticed that when it's thinner, it tends to be lighter. So I like my bread to be light, so I go ahead and just leave it kind of thin. It'll get thicker when it's time to knead it, but even still, it's not super thick. You'll see. So I will go ahead and cover it and let it rise for about 30 minutes or so. Well, very sadly, I made about an 8-minute long video showing you what the bread looked like, but my phone lost it. So you don't get to see it all. But the bread was very excited. The yeast really worked well. It rose to the top of the bowl and made the cover all dirty. I had to go soak it. The dough was very bubbly, and when I stirred it, beating it like I did before, it kind of came together in a big lump in the middle of the bowl. And if you see that, that's a good sign. It tells you that the gluten is well activated. I added 1/3 of a cup of oil and 2 tablespoons of salt. The tablespoons were not rounded, they're kind of scant, but about 2 tablespoons of salt. Then I added a bunch of flour. I was counting and I kind of lost count, but it was something like 5 or 6 cups of wheat flour to the dough, and I'm getting it ready to knead. So I'm really sorry that that other video got lost. That's very disappointing. Trying to position this. Okay. So here's what the bread looks like, and we're just adding flour. We're trying to get the flour kind of under the dough so that it's coats it, so the dough's not so sticky. And basically the way kneading works is that you fold it over again and again. So we fold it, we turn it, and we fold it. And it's very sticky still. I've got to add some more flour. I've kind of stopped measuring at this point. I'm just getting it to the right consistency. One thing I want to add is that if you are using red wheat instead of white wheat, you will need to do the whole kneading process with white flour instead of whole wheat flour. And that's just because I've tried it with red wheat and the bread turns out so heavy it doesn't rise well. Red wheat is just a heavier wheat. Red wheat flour is heavier flour. So if you're really serious about wanting to keep it 100% whole wheat, you'll need to use white flour. I often still use a little bit of white flour, although I'm trying not to so that you guys can see how to make just purely whole wheat bread. But if you have a Trader Joe's near you, you can get, for a very good price, unbleached white flour for I think $2.99 for 5 pounds. Okay, this is finally getting to a point where we can knead it now. Kind of have to work with it. You gotta add enough flour so it's not so sticky. And you can see it's all over my hands. Sometimes I clean off my hands because if my hands have a lot of dough on them, then they stick to the bread and it makes it hard to knead it. So I've been known even to spray my hands with oil or something just because it gets so sticky sometimes, but I think flour will do. I'm really bummed you all don't get to see what the bread looked like. It was so excited. It was pouring over the side of the bowl almost. I ended up letting it set for about 25 minutes and that was all it needed. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. I guess it just depends on the day. I don't know. Again, we're still not wanting to put too much flour in, so, you know, you just do your best, right? So sticky. There. Now it's starting to behave. And you see we're just turning it and folding it, pushing it down. Turning, folding, pushing it down. What I like to do sometimes, I think I'm going to try it now, is to actually just pick up the lump of dough and flip it over. Sometimes that helps because more flour got on top, so this helps it to be on the bottom now. So we're going to do this for a few minutes. This is a great way if you're feeling a little bit frustrated to kind of work out your own salvation. I mean, work out your troubles by putting pressure on something. Sorry. Alright, so I have been kneading this bread and it's ready to rise again. So I want to just show you kind of how I know that it's ready. I like to sprinkle a little bit of flour on top, and the reason you do that is so it won't be sticky. And then I kind of just poke it gently. And you can see how it bounces up a little bit. I don't know if you can see that. It bounces up just a little bit. And that just lets us know, hey, it's good. So I probably kneaded it for about 3 or 4 minutes. And then I like to rub just a little bit of oil on top, and that helps it not to get dried and crusty. My mom tends to pour oil in the bottom of the bowl and rub the dough around in it. I have done that for a long time. I did that, but I realized it's easier to do this. So just a little bit, and you just kind of rub it around. This dough looks very nice. Y'all did a good job. Alright. Okay, so we will cover this and let it set until it is ready. And the way we'll know it's ready is if we punch it like this. If the dough kind of bounces back up, then we know it's not ready. If we punch it and it starts to fall down, it is ready. So the bread is rising very quickly. I think it's because it's pretty warm in here. It's 80 something degrees outside, I guess. But I'm going to show you what it looks like when it's not ready to punch down and when you punch it. So I moved it off of the table because it's time for us to eat. But here's what it's looking like. It's rising quite rapidly. And basically I'm just going to hit it. And you see how it didn't really go down. It went down a little bit, but it kind of just stopped there. If it was ready to go down, it would fall quite drastically, which you will see. But that's one way you can test it, is you hit it, and if it goes down only a tiny bit, it's not ready. Whoa, look at our bread. I didn't even have time to clean up from lunch yet, barely, and I looked and I saw, whoa, it's so high. I got the table cleared so I could use it, but I haven't washed dishes yet. But now let's watch and see what it's going to do when I hit it. Ready? Ooh, see how it falls like that? That's how we know it is good and ready. So we are going to push it down and carry it over to the table. Okay, so I will start dividing up the dough. I don't weigh it. I just divide it into equal parts. And that's what I will go ahead and start doing now. Let me see if I can get this in the right location. It's always kind of tricky. Boy, I need to get a stand or something. Maybe that'll work. Okay. So here's our dough, and what I like to do is spray the table with some, oil spray, no stick cooking spray, Pam, whatever we want to call it, just so that the bread doesn't stick to it. And I start taking out the dough. So this is about, I don't know, clump. If I measured it in cups, it might be 2.5 or something. I'll make most of them about that size, and if there's some extra, I divvy it up. If it's not quite enough, then I change it a little bit. You can see I'm pretty relaxed about this bread making process. It's pretty forgiving, bread dough is. Just a little bit more. A little bit more there. So this will make a good 5 loaves, which is great. I like to wash my hands at this point and get all the dough off of them so that I don't have sticky fingers and mess up the loaves, because I want them to look pretty. So I'm going to go rinse off my hands. Okay, I will also spray the pans. And I want to talk a little bit about baking bread in cast iron pans. I have 5 cast iron pans, and I love them. I love my cast iron pans. They are very thick, and so I've found that it takes just a little bit longer to bake bread in cast iron than other pans. So I keep that in mind when I bake the bread. Sometimes I like to leave the cast iron loaves in just a little bit longer. So let's start with this loaf. It's a nice one. One thing I have found I always need to do is pound it, and that helps to get the air bubbles out. If you don't pound it, your bread will come out with large holes in it. So about like that, and then we just shape it into a nice loaf. Here are the rest of the loaves. Here's the one I just put in the pan, and I will continue to make the rest of them. My technology has not been very nice to me today. Sorry about all the glitches. Sometimes I need to spray the table again or spray my hands just to keep them from being too sticky. And again, this dough is more thin than what some people make. And that's again because it makes nice light loaves of bread. Sometimes people don't know what to do with my loaves because they're so light. Let's see. This bread recipe that I've been making is very basic. There are lots of things that you can do to it to make it more exciting. I like to use it for a basic Christmas bread recipe. At Christmas time, I will add a little bit of extra sugar and some dried fruit. Craisins are nice. You can put dried pineapple, dried papaya. I like to maybe zest a little bit of orange peel or lemon peel, and that makes really nice Christmas bread. I wanted to show you just how I'm picking this up. I kind of just pick it up with the tips of my fingers, and that helps the top of the loaf not to get messed up. I think it's important for the things that I bake to be nice looking. At this point, the less you handle it, the better. It's already been kneaded, it's already been activated, and so we really don't want to spend a lot of time handling the loaves. But we do want to smash the air bubbles out of them and shape them into loaves, and that's all. Basically, I fold it into a square and then just kind of roll it over. Sometimes it gets a little bit messed up and we have to do it again, but you just kind of roll it, tuck it in, and tuck the ends in. Here is what a loaf looks like right before I put it in the pan. So I'm having a hard time using this phone this way, but anyway, there's the loaf. And I'll just pick it up and put it in the pan. Very good. I will place the bread here, where I will let it rise one more time. We will cover it, and when it is ready to go in the oven, we will put it in the oven. Let me show you how you know it's ready. when it's not ready yet, you can kind of poke it and it kind of bounces back. When it's ready, when you poke it, it really stays in. There's quite a difference. So I'll show you that when I'm ready to put it in the oven. Well, friends, we are almost finished with our bread journey. Let's take a look and see how these loaves are turning out. Ooh, that one there looks kind of funny. That won't be one I'll give away as a gift. Let's see here. Ooh, see how it stays in like that? That is a pretty good sign that it's ready. And I've already preheated the oven to 350. So let's put the bread in the oven. Let me see. Here we go. I'm going to put in the cast iron pan first so it can stay in the back because it's going to stay in a little bit longer than the others. If you put the bread in the oven before it's ready, then it will rise really, really fast, get all kinds of big bubbles in it, and kind of look like it exploded, and then it will bake before it's ready, so it'll be kind of heavy. And you may have figured out by now I don't like heavy bread. Last one. All right, and I will leave this in the oven for about 45 minutes. And when I take it out, I will leave the cast iron pan in there for about 15 minutes more, oven off, and leave it in there for a little bit longer. Sometimes I've left it in there till the oven's all the way cool, and it doesn't hurt it. Just makes the bread nice and crusty. But that's about all there is to it, guys. And in just a little while, about 45 minutes, we'll take the bread out of the oven. Well, it is time to take the bread out of the oven. It has been baking for 45 minutes and smelling so good. Just get rid of that. So, well, you can't see very well. That's better. So I'm just getting my oven mitts on. Well, at least one of them. Where's the other one? Well, I've got one. I can't find the other oven mitts, so we'll just use one along with a holder. And here is a beautiful loaf of bread. And I tend to just take them out and put them right on top of the bread pan to cool. Here's another one. This one has a little bit of a dent in the middle because despite all my pounding on it, it's still got an air bubble that popped, but it's fine. It's good bread. Third one. fourth one. I will leave the last one in the oven for a few minutes longer, and I went ahead and turned the oven off. It'll be quite hot enough still. So here's our bread. I usually just leave it like this, and when it is cool, I can put it in a bag. You don't want to put it in a bag before it has cooled off because it will get soggy and wet in the bag. But once it's cool, you do want to put it in a bag right away to keep it soft. If it stays out for a long time, it will become hard. And that is the process of making bread. So I am sorry that the video in the middle disappeared. I was kind of grieved about that, but hopefully it will work for you, and I hope that you have a great time making bread for your family and yourself. God bless, and bye-bye. Okay, so I just added the salt and the oil. It was about 2 tablespoons of salt, not rounded, but kind of scant tablespoons. The gluten's nicely activated. You can see how it quickly comes up into a ball like that. That shows us that it's very well activated, and that's a great thing that the sponge method does, is that it activates the gluten. So now I'm going to start adding flour, and we are basically just going to add enough to where we can start kneading the bread. So it's going to be quite a bit. I think last time I counted about 5 or 6 cups. And of course it depends on your weather, and if it's dry then you won't add quite as much. I think it's fairly dry today, but it'll be approximately 5 or 6, I guess. And we want the bread to be able to be in a nice big hunk so that I can work with my hands in it and not get so sticky. This is the great thing about making bread with white wheat versus red wheat, is that you actually can knead it with the white wheat, even though it's whole wheat. But the red wheat is just way too sticky. Also, it is much heavier. So if you are using red wheat, I would recommend, once you get to this point of preparing it for kneading, only use white flour. Don't use any more whole wheat flour. And that will help the bread to be light. So it's getting thicker, and at some point I stop using a cup and I just use my hands because it's just how it works best for me. And it can seem like a lot of flour that you're using, but it will get used up. And a lot of times at some point I'll end up just picking up the whole lump of dough and flipping it over. And that way there's a nice lot of flour on the bottom, and that helps it not stick to the bowl so much. And it makes it easier to knead.